Hi everyone, this is Stephanie from the Pasadena Public Library. I am coming to you today with a very simple sewing project to make a corner bookmark. As you can see, it's just a little square that has a diagonal piece that goes over the corner of your page. So I am just going to be using a few scrap pieces of fabric for this. You shouldn't need more than a 1/4 yard in total, so you could definitely use a fat quarter for this project. I am using a few different pieces of fabric, but you can use all of the same fabric if you'd like. For this, you're going to need a pattern piece that is 4 1/4 inches by 4 1/4 inches in a square. And if you don't want to make this, you can just use a ruler to mark it directly onto your fabric. You'll also need to cut out a couple of pieces of interfacing. And for the interfacing, I am using this fusible midweight interfacing from Pellon, but you could use any fusible midweight interfacing. It doesn't have to be this particular one. Okay guys, I have ironed my fabric, so I've got 3 different pieces of fabric here that I'm going to be cutting out, all using the same pattern piece. So I'm just going to cut one out of each of these particular fabrics. This one with the polar bears, I'm going to be using to make my diagonal piece. So I'm going to be a little bit fussy about how I cut out this piece because I want to have a bear sort of in the top right corner. So whichever piece of fabric you are using to make your corner piece, think about what you want to be visible in this area here. There we go. So I'm just going to pin that in place and cut that out. As you can see, that will be my little corner piece. So I'm just going to cut out 2 more pieces, and I don't need to be as fussy about how these pieces cut out. So these are the back piece and the piece that's sort of in the middle right behind the pocket. So for this one, I am just going to stack them on top of each other just to save myself a little bit of time in cutting. And in total, I'm going to have 3 squares. So I have just used this pattern piece to cut out 2 pieces of fusible interfacing that are also 4.25 by 4.25 inches. And the next thing I'm going to do is cut one of these on the diagonal. So you can just mark it with a ruler and a pen, or I am just going to go ahead and flash it right down the diagonal using my rotary cutter. But if you don't have a rotary cutter, you can of course just use a pencil to mark your cutting line and then cut this in half. So I only need one of these pieces, so I'm going to set one aside. And I can use that for another bookmark. So whichever pattern piece you want to use as the piece that goes behind the pocket, facing forwards, you're going to fuse your fusible interfacing to that piece. And make sure you have the sticky glue side facing the wrong side of your fabric. It's usually a good idea to use a press cloth when you are attaching your fusible interfacing, so I'm just using a scrap of fabric here in between my iron and the interfacing. And I'm just going to press my iron in place, hold it for about 10 seconds in each position, and then move it to the next position until the entire piece is fused. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the pocket piece. So take that bit of fusible interfacing and place it in the top right corner of your pocket piece. That is the top left if you're looking at it from the back, like here. And make sure you have that sticky, scratchy glue side facing down on the wrong side of the fabric. Just get that into position, then use your press cloth on top and fuse that interfacing into place. Now that the interfacing is fused, you're going to fold the fabric along the diagonal using the interfacing as a guide and press it. point, you can choose to do a bit of top stitching right along the edge of that diagonal here at about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, or you can skip that step. Now I'm going to stack up my pieces. So start with your interfaced square and place it face up. Then you're going to place the interfaced triangle piece in the top right corner, also face up. On top of that, you'll take the uninterfaced square and place it face down on top of the stack. Then you will pin everything together and stitch all the way around, leaving a 2-inch piece along one of the sides that doesn't have the pocket unstitched. I am marking that area with chalk, so I remember not to stitch in this area between the chalk lines. So starting at one of those chalk marks, I am going to stitch with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around this square until I get back around to the other chalk mark. Remember to pivot around the corners, so that means when you get to about 3/8 of an inch away from the edge, you'll make sure your needle is down, turn your fabric 90 degrees with the presser foot up, put your presser foot back down, then continue stitching until you get to the next corner, then repeat. Trim off all of your corners, being careful not to cut through your stitching line, and then turn the fabric right side out. Use something like a chopstick or a knitting needle or a pen to push out those corners as much as possible. Then you're going to press the entire square as flat as possible, making sure that your seam allowances in that gap are pressed to the inside. Now starting at one of the bottom corners, I am going to top stitch all the way around this square at about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. So when I get to this point, you can see that the presser foot is at an angle, which makes it really hard for the sewing machine to feed your fabric through the sewing machine evenly. So at this point, it's kind of stuck, so I make sure my needle is down, I lift up my presser foot, and I just take up a scrap of fabric, fold it into a thick piece, and then I'm going to place that under the back of the presser foot to even everything out. Once that presser foot is even, it's a lot easier to move the fabric through the machine. And now I can continue stitching all the way around this square. So anytime you come across an area that is thicker and your presser foot is not level, you'll want to use that trick. As always, you'll want to remember to backstitch at the beginning and end of all of your seams, and then you are done with this bookmark. So there is the finished bookmark. It's completely done. It was a really fast project and it took really very little fabric, so it's a really nice way to use up your scraps. So I hope you give this project a try, and happy sewing!